Distinguished participants, welcome to the panel organized by Istanbul Aydin University. I would like to thank you all for your participation. Let me introduce first the participants. Mrs. Ramano from Romania, and Lieutenant General Mr. Hodges from Center for European Policy Analysis, Mr. Ambassador, retired Fatih Ceylan, former Turkish permanent representative to NATO 2013 until 2018. Dr. Edward Erickson, retired professor of military history. Dr. George Tzogopoulos, lecturer, European Institute of Nice. Dr. Ahmad, Shahidov, head of Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy of Human Rights. The purpose of this panel is to discuss Ukraine crisis and its effects on global and regional security, and to find, of course, possible solution if we can. We planned the panel in 3 parts. Each session will be 30 minutes. In each session, I would like to ask each of you one question. I will be very happy if you could answer each question in 5 minutes, at the most, of course. Now, our president, the president of Istanbul Aydin University, unfortunately, will not able to attend to make his opening speech because of the unexpected situation. Now, Mr. General, let me pose the first question to you, sir. Could you evaluate the Russia-Ukraine war in terms of the US-Russian power struggle, sir? The geopolitical power struggle between USA, NATO, and Russia continues in Ukraine, as you know. Can you evaluate it, sir? In general.
I would evaluate it in 3 points. First of all, we have been reminded that the United States does not have the luxury of choosing who our threats are. As much as many people would like to focus just on China, Russia has reminded us that they also are a threat, not only to us, but to all of our most important allies, and to stability and security in Europe, which has a direct impact on our own economic well-being as well as our security. So it's been a reminder, and I think we've woken up to it in time, but it's a shame that we had to be reawakened, and now we're bringing stuff back into Europe that used to be there. The second thing is that we have been reminded, no, let me say it differently. The Biden administration has been confirmed in their desire to rebuild our alliances, to strengthen the relationship with all of our European allies, with inside NATO, to improve the relationship with the European Union, because we recognize that we do not have the capacity, we don't have the capacity to deal with any of our threats alone. And so I think the job by Secretary Blinken, probably one of the best diplomatic efforts I've seen by the United States, maybe since the Dayton Peace Accords in 1995, where there's actual consultation and working with allies, not directing, pushing, or pulling allies. And so I think this has been an important part of this competition with this deadly competition with Russia. The third component of this is that it has highlighted the need for the United States to have a strategy for the Black Sea region. Ukraine is not an island. And so to understand why it's important that we're supporting Ukraine, you have to have a strategy for the entire region, which means we have to have a better relationship, repair the relationship with our Turkish allies, understand the importance of the Caucasus, understand the importance of Romania and Bulgaria, so that we can then make policy decisions that help protect our interests as well as democracy more broadly inside the region. I think, sir, you're muted.
Sir, thank you very much for comment. Okay. Mr. Ambassador, I want to pose the same question to you, sir. Could you please evaluate the Russian-Ukraine war in terms of the US-Russian power struggles?
Well, thank you, and I should like to thank Aydin University and National Security and Strategy Research Center to organize this important and timely event. Having a NATO background, it's my leisure time business to read the strategy documents of different countries, including the United States, certainly, Russia and China. So what's happening right at the moment in the Ukrainian theater is beyond US-Russia rivalry. We are talking about a global security challenge that we all face, and we have to think accordingly. So when we compare the security and defense and military and nuclear strategies of these three main actors, what we see in those important documents is that three of them laid down the building blocks for a strategic competition having implications certainly for the alliance. So there is certainly a US-Russian competition, particularly in the aftermath of 2014. We are talking about annexation, occupation and annexation of Crimea, and the destabilization of the Donbas region. And China also joined this bandwagon, actually, in this, what some people prefer to term as systemic rivalry. So what we are witnessing now, right now, is an ongoing actual war in the Ukrainian theater, and you can separate it into different stages. Maybe one can even claim that the genesis of this competition, which has now translated into an open conflict, is 2008 Russia-Georgia war. And the reaction of the West was not sufficient to deter Russia from occupying and annexing Crimea and starting destabilizing the Donbas region. Even after 2014, there had been a series of defensive measures within NATO vis-a-vis the Russian threat. Russia was never accepted as a threat, particularly in the aftermath of the fall of the Berlin Wall. It transitioned from a main threat to a potential threat up till 2014, despite the fact that there was a war in 2008 between Russia and Georgia. But 2014 was an inflection point, which also led to strategic competition, including the Euro-Atlantic area, but going beyond it. So I think it would be much better, in my personal opinion, to address this issue as a global strategic rivalry, and the pinnacle of it is now the conflict going on in Ukraine. So that is how I would answer your question, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, sorry. Mrs. Ramona, would you like to comment on the same question?
I'm not very familiar, let's say, with the historical and other facts, but I can tell you a few things from a Romanian point of view, because Romania has borders with Ukraine.
Oh, of course.
Since the war started, there were a lot of non-governmental organizations that help a lot of refugees to be welcomed and to care in Romania. Also, the Romanian government made a lot of supplements in order to help all these people. Not all the refugees decided to live in Romania or to remain in Romania. They just crossed Romania to other European countries. And those who decide to stay here are very welcome, even in particular in private homes. So there are people who really enroll on list in order to host these refugees, especially women and children. There are a lot of translators who are engaged in order to translate for them, because most of them don't speak any foreign language. So it was, I don't know, there were a lot of TV shows asking people to help and so on. So we have a lot of these kind of organizations at the borders, and we help them. We also offer for free food, means of transport, and so on. And all the students who come, even if they are Ukrainian students or foreign students, they are very welcome. They can study for free in Romania. They immediately get a visa for at least 3 months. And if they want to study here, they can study for free. Otherwise, they can apply for other countries. So we've been very open to help these people, and we are still doing this. And we have a lot of programs to help them. So from the academic point of view, all the professors and the teachers, because there are children in kindergarten, in high school, and so on. We tried to offer them programs on inclusion and equity, and try to teach our own Romanian children about how to behave with these refugee people.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Erickson? Yeah.
Sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Erickson, may I have your comment on this question? Why didn't the USA and NATO provide the necessary weapons to Ukraine before the invasion of Russia? What do you think about that? If the US and NATO countries had given the same support before the invasion, would Russia have launched the attack?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me to attend the conference, and this is a great question. The supply of weapons to the Ukraine has always been incremental, step by step. And what has affected that in the United States, and to a certain extent in NATO, are national budgets. In the United States, Congress has to approve money for the spending of weapons to give to other countries, and then Congress has to actually approve the delivery of the weapons. Turkey right now suffers under an American restraint regarding weapons. So these are internal domestic issues for my country. We did not understand the seriousness of Putin's thinking until early in 2022. So there was no imperative, no drive to heavily arm the Ukraine between 2014 and 2022. Within NATO, as we see a similar situation, the consensus of all members to approve weapons transfers probably would have been seen anytime before February of 2022, especially in countries like Germany, reliant on and sympathetic to Russia in terms of gas delivery, as enormously destabilizing. So all of the cumulative effect of these impediments slowed down, delayed, and made weapons transfer enormously difficult bilaterally and within the NATO, within the alliance construct. So what would have happened with Putin? I personally don't think Putin's decision to invade was linked to military strength. If the Ukraine had 20 more MiG-29s or 500 more T-72s or T-80s, would that, or 1,000 javelins, would that have altered Putin's decision? I think not, because his decision was not, as near as I understand, based on a balance of power. It was not based on force ratios. It was an emotional decision based on his sense of the intelligence picture about the will of the Ukrainian people to resist. It doesn't matter how many weapons a country has if the people aren't willing to fight. Putin's decision was based on the idea that the Ukrainians would not fight. So I think in that sense, it's a moot point, or it's not a terribly important point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thanks. Yeah. Mr. Tzogopoulos, I want to pose the same question to you, sir. Why didn't the USA and NATO provide the necessary weapons to Ukraine before the invasion of Russia? What is your comment on that, sir?
Thank you, Professor Baburoglu, for this kind invitation, and to Aydin University for this excellent discussion. Before I do respond to this specific question, I believe that the debate as it has started is very, very interesting concerning the future direction of international relations. And in particular, I find highly interesting the remarks of the general that the United States has no luxury to deal with specific threats. And having said that, it seems to me quite interesting for the short term and medium term to explore and examine up to what extent the United States will be able to cope with two fronts at the same time, meaning both the Ukraine war in Eurasia and obviously the Indo-Pacific region and the rise of China. And this also brings me to the point that the ambassador made about the fact that NATO, practically US and its European allies, will need up to some extent to focus on the Eurasia region due to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. But at the same time, NATO is also looking into illustrating China as not necessarily a rival, but a challenge that needs somehow to be dealt with. And having said that, we are looking forward to the Madrid summit of June 2022. That, in my opinion, will be the most important summit of recent years, as we are expecting the new doctrine of the alliance under particularly complicated circumstances. And also another point that I find highly interesting coming from the point of the general is related to the fact that he mentioned that the United States needs its partners, especially in Europe, in order to respond to the new challenges. What again I find particularly interesting to monitor in the medium and short term is up to what extent the thinking of the United States and the European Union will be parallelized as far as the perception of common challenges is concerned. Because what we have observed following the beginning of the invasion is that the two sides came together, but from the experience of how European countries are dealing with sanctions imposed to Russia, especially at the domestic and the political level, I'm a little bit skeptical up to what extent in the medium term European countries will be happy or satisfied to continue with the same policy, not because they do not believe the sanctions are working, but because the impact of the sanctions on the societies themselves is dramatic. And this election that is taking place this Sunday in France, for example, will be catalytic for the future, not only of France, but of European integration and perhaps for transatlantic relations. Regarding the question about the armament of Ukraine, it is a very important question. However, I should say that there was quite good cooperation between the US and Ukraine in the previous years. And according to the Russian position, the fact that this military cooperation was so good was on the reasons, one of the reasons that the other side is using in order to explain and justify the invasion. So I would perhaps turn the discussion also to the other side, suggesting that the existing cooperation was perhaps not to the extent that Professor Baburoglu's questions might have envisaged, but it was developing so fast and so quickly that the Ukrainians are resisting, because we cannot believe that the Ukrainians are resisting because they are receiving the armaments and the supplies only after the invasion. It is a work that it was making for years, and the results are being monitored right now as the work is continuing.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Mr. Shahidov?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Naim Hocam. First of all, I express my deep gratitude to Istanbul Aydin University for organizing and inviting me such important conference. In fact, no one was ready for this war, I think. No one expected it. However, Russia has been planning this war since 2014. And the Ukrainian-Russian war is, in fact, a global problem because it affects all of us in this regard. I consider today's online conference very important. So Russia's attack on Ukraine has been threatening the whole world since first day. I think Ukraine and Russia are not the only ones to suffer in this war. Of course, these two countries suffer the most, but we are also affected by this war. Also, my country, Azerbaijan, is also suffering from this war because 500,000 Azerbaijanis living in Ukraine, they are killed, they are moving from their homes, and on the other hand, 3 million Azerbaijanis lives in Russia today, and they face these sanctions in their daily life. So it's possible to approach this war from different aspects, from different political aspects, but I would like to discuss the human aspects of this war, because as a human rights activist, first of all, the human factor is important to me, because innocent people die every day, children lose their lives, and more than 5 million people, Ukrainians, as well as the residents in Ukraine, live as a refugees in Europe today. And today Europe is facing a very serious threat to its security. Russia's military intervention in Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Finland, Estonia, and other countries is a matter of time, I think, because serious Western sanctions are making Russia even more desperate and more aggressive, and Russia's economy is collapsing day by day, and as a result, a country with the world's largest nuclear arsenal is likely to endanger all of humanity in the event of default. That is why this war must be stopped immediately, I think, and the whole world must mobilize and work to stop this war. In fact, as a response to your first question, this war has become more of a US-Russian war than a Ukrainian-Russian war, because Ukraine and even I will say Europe has been chosen as a platform in this process. The goal is to draw Russia into the new war, to turn the whole world against Moscow and to overthrow Russia. And this is the main goal today, because the shooting down of a Moscow warship in the Black Sea once again showed that the United States is a passive participant in this war, because Ukraine is not capable of hitting a Russian ship alone. And intelligence is very important here. In this regard, Ukraine is receiving very strong intelligence support from the West countries, and this point could make Russia more aggressive and expand the geography of these military operations. In this case, I think that the next stage will be the target of Eastern European countries. So that's why the first what we should do, we should stop this war and invite the sides to dialogue. And I think Turkey is the best country that doing it. But unfortunately, after the Istanbul meeting on March 29, this dialogue was failed because of these Bucha events. I think we will no chance to have this dialogue in soon days, in next days. But that's why Russia intensifies these military operations, and the failing of Mariupol city is a matter of time. So I will continue then with your next question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your contribution, sir.
General, can I add some remarks to what has already been said as a contribution to the ongoing discussion? Now, first and foremost, I think we have to take into account that the European Union adopted this strategic compass on 21st of March very recently. And when you look at the threat analysis part of it, I think it does not diverge in the main from what's written in NATO 2030 report, that's United for a New Era. So the main threat is Russia. That's the first place it occupies in the strategic compass. And it will definitely be the same case with the new strategic concept of NATO in June 2022. And when you look at the China part, so it's defined in different terms. China is a competitor, but also a country which would present opportunities for cooperation. And that's how it was defined in the EU strategic concept. So I do not believe that there will be divergence of threat analyses in terms of the EU strategic compass and the strategic concept of NATO to be updated in June 2022. This is one thing. The second thing is that with regard to your question, why did the West not provide lethal weapons to Ukraine? That there was discussion also in NATO on that, in that respect, and so that remained as a controversy, not to provide lethal weapons to Ukraine, but to provide non-lethal weapons, and also, of course, training according to NATO standards. And the main reason behind this was, quote unquote, not to provoke Russia, even in the face of occupation and annexation of Crimea and Russian activities in the Donbas region. So there was a sort of divergence of opinion in terms of what could possibly be done to enhance the defense of Ukraine vis-a-vis the Russian aggression. But there were countries, I don't want to name the names, who had a more kind of hesitant, stance in terms of providing weapons to Ukraine. another group of countries opposing it and saying that, look, it will not stop there, so Russia will continue if it feels kind of weaknesses or lack of coherence vis-a-vis Russia. But there was this discussion, and I think Trump made a decision to provide lethal weapons before he left office. And now we have a different ball game, all sorts of, it's called defensive weapons, but we know that if you're talking of javelins and other anti-tank, equipment, so it's defensive and offensive. So I think that should also be taken into account while discussing this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your comment. Mr. General, we have another question to you. Mr. General?
I'm right here.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. General, what are Russia's political goals? What do you think about the realization of political and military goals of Russia? And of course, how do you see the outcome of Russia-Ukraine war? Will Putin declare victory?
Well, first, if you'll allow me, I'm very happy that Dr. Shahidov is here participating tonight, because I was worried we would not hear a Kremlin perspective, but he's given the Kremlin perspective tonight. What a unbelievable statement, sir, to say that.
You are very pessimistic, sir.
No, I mean, to say that this is a U.S.-Russia proxy war. I didn't hear any comment from you about what Russia has done, why they've attacked 8 years ago, all of their aggression, the deportation of Ukrainians, to somehow put this in a category that this is just a U.S. sort of plan to get rid of Russia. There's zero evidence of that. And also to say that Ukrainians are not capable of finding that ship and destroying it is also, I think, uninformed. To your question, I think that the goal of President Putin is to eliminate Ukraine as a state, and also to eliminate the idea of Ukraine as a state. He's said that himself over the past few years, that Ukraine is not actually a legitimate country. He has revised history significantly over the past few years, and we should have listened more closely to what he was saying, so we would not have been surprised. I think the destruction of Ukrainian cities and infrastructure shows that he's not interested in using the Ukrainian infrastructure for Russia. He's wanting to make sure that Ukraine has zero possibility of any kind of economic recovery, and also the attempt to isolate Ukraine from the sea. He's just about done that now on Azov Sea. Fortunately, he was stopped in the vicinity of Kherson in the drive to get Odessa, which I heard all day from Turkish friends what a terrible problem that would be for Turkish security and economy if Odessa was lost. So I think that the goal, though, fortunately, he's not going to achieve this goal because of the corruption inside the Russian Ministry of Defense. Well, we've seen that the incredible amount of money that they have spent on modernizing their military has actually gone into the pockets of oligarchs and people inside the ministry and the general staff. And they have a military that is less than half of what they said it was. The operational capability of the Russian Navy is terrible. This has been exposed. So I think the Russians, they've already lost this war, regardless of what happens in the next 2, 3, 4 months. They have lost because of the failure to achieve any of their objectives, the damage that's happening to their economy because of them, because of their decision, the loss of credibility of any senior Russian official. Nobody believes anything that they say now because they've been exposed as absolutely, totally false. Hopefully, hopefully, and of course, the Russian people deserve so much better than what they get from this corrupt government that they have now. Hopefully, we'll get past this, and one day, Russia will be able to rejoin the community of responsible nations, but that's not going to happen as long as the current regime is in place.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, for your comment. Mrs. Ramona? Mrs. Ramona? Mrs. Ramona, can you hear me?
Hello, I have some problems with.
I see.
Okay, could I be
Oh, Ms. Ramona,
only an attendant because all
do you
this,
have any comment on the same question?
No.
No, thank you. Thank you. So, okay. Let me go to, yeah. Mr. Erickson?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Do you have any comment on the same question? If you want, I can repeat it. What are Russia's political goals? What do you think about the realization of political and military goals of Russia? And how do you see the outcome of the Russian-Ukraine war? Will Putin declare victory?
Great questions. I think the initial political objective was simply to install a Russia-friendly government, to remove the Zelensky government somehow, either forcing them to flee or putting them in prison. From a military point of view, the initial attacks, the initial campaign was so clumsy. It was not a deliberate offensive campaign. It was a hasty campaign to achieve something like Hitler's Auschwitz in 1938 when he went into Austria, where it would not be opposed, maybe not quite friendly cheering crowds, but no real opposition that would allow the rapid occupation of the country. Does Putin desire to annex the entire country of Ukraine? I don't know. I think he would be comfortable with something with a relationship with the Ukraine as he has with a relationship with Belarus, where like Belarus, Ukraine would become a client or a puppet state, where he wouldn't have to endure the full costs of occupation. So I don't have insight into Putin's mind, but that's kind of what I think he would shoot for. The realization of his political military goals, complete failure. So they are now, of course, in a strategic and operational pause. And we think yesterday or the day before they have reopened the campaign, offensive operations. So he has, I think, readjusted the political goal for the occupation, the seizure and occupation of the Donbass region, as near as we can tell. The outcome, you mentioned the outcome. It's too early to tell. It can go in a number of different directions. As Clausewitz said about outcomes of war, wars are never final. Win, lose, or draw. If Putin wins, there will probably be a continuation war. If Putin doesn't win, there may be a protracted war in the sense of what Mao Zedong talked about. What kind of a termination document would there be? A surrender document? Would there be a negotiated treaty? Would there be an armistice? We had an armistice in Korea in 1953, and it's still in place, and it's still technically a state of war. So all these are possible outcomes, branches and sequels of events, and it's too early to tell right now. And I would simply state, if anybody says otherwise, I think they're wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Ambassador, do you have any comment on the same question?
Well, I thank you very much indeed, I would say General Baburoglu rather than
Yes,
Professor.
thank you very much.
I do agree with the proposition that Russia wanted Ukraine like Belarus. I remember, for instance, during Macron's visit to Moscow, he had a long meeting around a long table for hours and hours. And then he started talking about Finlandization of Ukraine, but I do not believe that that's what Putin aimed at. He wanted to have a country like Belarus. Now, trying to get into the shoe of Putin, I think we have to go back and check his statements, which I do believe kind of illuminates what he has in his mind, starting with the early 2000s, when he took the helm in Russia. I mean, he was extremely disappointed with the international order, including the global security order, and he didn't hide his feelings, saying that the dissolution of the Soviet Union was a catastrophe of the 20th century. He said it in 2005, and then in 2007 at Munich Security Conference, he challenged the what he describes as a kind of unipolar world monopolized by the United States. And he challenged this, and he talked about the importance of a kind of multi-polar world. And then I think one of the best examples that reflects his mindset is what he wrote in July 2021, an article. It's still in the website of Kremlin. It's on the historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians. Now, when you read it, it consists of like 10,000 words. He doesn't think that there is a nation called Ukraine. I mean, he doesn't accept the nationhood of Ukraine, neither the sovereignty and independence of Ukraine. I mean, it's a manifestation, as far as I can see, of his mindset. And he repeated that. He used the same rhetoric on different occasions. So when you kind of eradicate the basis of sovereignty as such, then the goal is clear. I mean, trying to kind of monopolize power centers in Ukraine. But of course, he met a very full-fledged resistance demonstrated by the Ukrainian armed forces. And in the northern front, it became a failure for Putin. Now he's using the southern front, like Mariupol and Kharkiv, bombing the area. And he's trying to kind of link Donbas region with Crimea. That seems to be his objective as things stand now. Now, whether that will be extended to Odessa is another issue that needs serious elaboration and thinking, because I do agree with General Hodges that if Russia controls or establishes control in Odessa, I think that will change the all security equations in the Black Sea region. And one must be extremely cautious about that. And will he succeed? Well, he might have some military successes. But that doesn't mean that Putin succeeded in Ukraine. But he has success in different fields. Like he served very well in consolidating NATO, because there was a kind of a little bit of fluid perception of the Russian threat, quote unquote, even after 2014. So he kind of served the solidification of NATO, consolidation of NATO, which means consolidation of transatlantic framework. And I mean, one should commend him for pushing Finland and Sweden to become NATO members. So he was complaining about the expansion of NATO coming to Russia via Ukraine. Now NATO will go to Russia via Finland and Sweden. And that's a quote-unquote success story as far as Putin is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Tzogopoulos? Mr. Tzogopoulos?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I want to pose the same question to you, sir. What are Russia's political goals? What do you think about the realization of political and military goals? And how do you see the outcome of this war? Will Putin declare victory?
Great remarks so far. I don't want to repeat several of the important observations already made. As far as the Ukraine scheme is concerned, the only thing I would like to say is that probably, the military objectives of Russia are getting adjusted to how the war is progressing. And this is quite clear according to the evidence we are having. Because as Dr. Erickson said at the beginning, the initial goal of Russia from the very first beginning was completely different from what is happening right now. And obviously this was not a choice of the Russian government. It is a development which was the consequence of the resistance of the Ukrainian forces. However, as I'm based in several European countries teaching here, I'd like also to offer the European position on what is happening, especially in relation to the part of your question about the political goals that Russia might have. And the good news so far, as they are coming from the big European capitals, Berlin, Paris, and Rome, is that the European Union remains very united in the first waves of sanctions that are imposed on Russia. However, if we do analyze the war itself, there is a likelihood, I would say, or there's a scenario that Russia itself and the president of Russia are attempting to challenge European integration, not in the short and medium term, but in the long term. And this is the most important risk. And why I'm saying that? I'm saying that because the policy on sanctions that the European Union is applying in the case of Russia so far does not include imports of natural gas or oil, because the European Union is obviously too much dependent, at least most of the member states of the European Union, which is an issue that obviously Russia knows very well. The system of the pipelines already operates, and it cannot be replaced from the one day to the other. And perhaps this will be a card in the table that Russia will play in the long term. The second thing that perhaps might be part of the political strategy of Russia could be to divide the European Union by causing a refugee crisis, which is still which is ongoing. And as you all know, the European Union has suffered a lot by a high number of refugees reaching European countries since 2015, 2016. And perhaps it will be part of the strategy of the Kremlin to cause additional pain to Europe, because the initial sentiment obviously is that of welcoming the refugees who are suffering by the drama of the war, but we do not know what will happen in the long term. And the third aspect of a potential political strategy of Russia might be to cause an economic crisis to several European countries. Just to give you one example, there will be no Russian tourists, for example, visiting several European countries this summer due to the war and due to the sanctions and the fact that airlines are not flying from Russia to Europe. This is another element that perhaps in the long term will play a role on the general strategy of the European Union. For now, the developments in Europe are quite positive, but I would say that we have to wait and see how the situation will evolve after the summer.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Mr. Shahidov? Mr. Shahidov?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
Yes, before...
Just one second, sir. I have one question to you about how will Russia's invasion of Ukraine affect Putin's future? This is the question to you. But before that, if you have any comment on the previous speakers, please let me have your comment.
Yes, thank you, Naim Hocam. Before answering your question, I would like to make a very brief comment on a speech of Mr. General. When I said that the United States was involved in this war, I meant that the prolongation of this war is in the national interest of the United States, in fact, because the weakening and collapsing of Russia is one of the main goals of US foreign policy. But the fact is that Ukraine is being destroyed today. Official Kyiv had to realize that it was located in a very difficult geopolitical geography and had to pursue a more balanced policy. Today's war could be avoided by establishing normal relations with Russia, but unfortunately the Zelensky government did not do that. As Azerbaijanis, we know Russia's attitude to its neighbors very well, because we have been facing this aggressive policy for 30 years, and today there is a Russian army, so-called peacekeepers in Karabakh, and we know from our own experience how dangerous it is to enter into a confrontation with the Kremlin. In this regard, the mistakes made by Georgia in 2008 should not have been repeated in Ukraine, because in the first days of this war, Ukraine was left alone on the battlefield and no actual help came from NATO, from West, from the United States, and today's assistance is not enough yet. And Ukrainian air defense completely destroyed. And if the United States had not really helped, there would have been no need to openly pit Kiev against Russia. Take Azerbaijan as an example. For example, today official Baku maintains a very normal relations with the United States, with NATO members, and we have normal relations with Russia. We are neighbors of Iran. At the same time, we have very good relation with Israel as well. In this regard, it's very important to pursue a balanced geopolitics. Failure to do so will result in what is now Ukraine. Promises do not come true, and you are helpless in front of the aggressive and destructive Russia. Of course, Russia's goal in this war is very clear: gain something from this war. Returning empty-handed means Putin's end. In that sense, it is possible Putin bought or paid for the dissertation and did not. So I think Putin's main goal is how to get Crimea and recognition Crimea as a Russian land by Ukraine and all international community. And I think Russian army will not stop until it achieves these goals in Ukraine. As the war drags on, military operations will intensify and Russians will fight to the end. Because as I studied in Russia for 5 years, and I know the internal situation in Russia, the characters of Russian foreign policy, I think either Russia will be destroyed or it will gain what it needs in Ukraine. Both scenarios do not promise well for humanity. I think Russia could use nuclear weapons when it is destroyed, which will endanger not only Ukraine and Russia and all of humanity, as well as my country, my region. That's why I think the main thing here, not to prolong this war. Maybe Russia will win or Ukraine will win in this war, no matter. I think that peace negotiations must be continued, and Turkey is the only country that can organize these negotiations again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shahidov. And Mrs. Ramona, how did this war affect your country, Romania? Do you have any comment?
I'm not sure if it will affect or not, but for example, in 1939, when due to the Treaty of Ribbentrop-Molotov, you know that the Republic of Moldavia went to Soviet Union at the time, and for 50 years Romania was under communist rule. So we, on one hand, we are very afraid of this, but on the other hand, we cannot think of being again affected by the Russians. Of course, for Putin, now Putin is not in a good position. He has to pretend that he has won something there. So he is going maybe to conquer any piece of land and then to praise himself, because he can do anything in terms of fake news. So on all the TV stations in Romania, we discuss about this fake news and how he tries to influence his people that he is doing good. For example, in our university, the Faculty of Foreign Languages, we offer a program in Russian language and literature. And our students at the beginning were very afraid of all the people, what they think about them, because they, in fact, they study cultural things, not about war and politics and so on. Of course, at the social and moral level, we will suffer some changes, but in terms of historical facts, I don't know. But I don't know if you can trust me, because I teach literature, so this is the only question.
Thank you very much for your comment. Thanks a lot.
Thank you too.
Well, yeah. Mr. General, Mr. General? Okay. Mr. General, as you know, the issue of Russia's use of nuclear weapons is on the agenda. Could Putin use nuclear weapons? What do you think about this issue, sir?
Yes, of course it could, but I don't believe he will. I believe that we have exaggerated the possibility of escalation, and made policy decisions based on an exaggerated fear. Now, of course, nuclear weapons are no laughing matter. There's risk involved, and I can understand why our president and other leaders are very careful about this. But in my view, Russia's nuclear weapons are only useful to them as long as they don't use them. Because they see that there's so much concern and hesitancy about doing things that need to be done because of that possibility. But the Kremlin has been threatening nuclear strike on numerous countries for years, and of course they even made a very recently against Finland and Sweden against the idea of either of those countries seeking membership in the alliance. So, as I think about it, it seems to me that there is no battlefield advantage. Having nuclear weapons will not significantly increase Russia's effectiveness in the conflict. I mean, they have already murdered tens of thousands of innocent Ukrainians using rockets and artillery and missiles, as well as soldiers executing innocent civilians. So I don't know what kind of advantage they would get from doing that. And on the other hand, it would be impossible for the West to stay out of this conflict if Russia did use even a low yield tactical nuclear weapon. Secretary General Stoltenberg said that if Russia used a chemical weapon, that would put the war in a whole new category. Well, obviously, by extension, you would say the same thing about if Russia used a nuclear weapon. And I think President Putin, even though he's evil and brutal and medieval, he's also rational in a Russian sense. And I also think the people at the other end of that long table, they're thinking that there will be life after Putin. And I don't believe that they see any positive outcome for Russia should Russia use a nuclear weapon inside Ukraine. So that's why I think it's unlikely.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, I have
Dr. Baburoglu, could I address that question as well quickly?
Sorry, just a second, sir. Just a second. Mr. General, short answer, please, Mr. General. Would this war be a second Afghanistan defeat for Russia, Mr. General? Short answer, please.
Russia has already lost. So, I mean, they've already lost, regardless of what happens in the next few months.
I see. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Erickson? Yeah.
Thank you. This question intrigues me. NATO, the NATO school in Oberammergau, back during the Cold War, taught a course, and I took it, called Nuclear Target Analysis. And the thing about nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons, there's a function called downwind drift and the plume of radioactive debris and material. If we go back to Chernobyl in 1986, after the detonation, after the meltdown, all of the nuclear debris was blown to the east. In the northern hemisphere, the winds are westerlies. So let's say Putin decides to use a tactical nuclear weapon in the Donbass, even a small one. That nuclear debris, the cloud, the plume of radioactive material drifts by the winds. It's blown directly over Luhansk. It keeps on going. It's going to keep on going. It's going to go. It's going to cover Rostov. It will cover Kursk. It will cover Volgograd. Even a small yield weapon, designed non radioactivity cloud producing, is still going to do that. So people used to ask me about Iran nuclear weapons. If you drop a nuclear weapon, detonate a nuclear weapon in Tel Aviv, the radioactive cloud covers Jerusalem. It covers Baghdad. It keeps on going, and it covers Tehran. So as a practical matter, people who use nuclear weapons are trained to template where these things go. So the short answer is I can't imagine that Putin and the Russian general staff would use a nuclear weapon, yes, even a tiny one, based on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Erickson, short answer, please. Would this war be a second Afghanistan defeat for Russia?
The effect of Afghanistan was the outcome of an 8 to 10 year process, as was Vietnam for our country. So would war exhaustion that affects the government or the people of the country be applicable to the Ukraine scenario? I don't think so. I don't think it can possibly last that long. I don't think that the Russian people will be that tired of fighting the war. So I take General Hodges' point. They've lost the war seemingly right now, but maybe not. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your comment. Mr. Ambassador, the issue of Russia's use of nuclear weapons is on the agenda. Could Putin use nuclear weapons? The same question, sir.
Well, you have to check the nuclear strategy document of Russia. I mean, there are conditions attached to using a nuclear weapon, be it a low yield tactical nuclear weapon or beyond. Russia has to see its existential as an existential threat. Now, if it defines something as an existential threat, then it might revert to using a nuclear bomb of any category. This is one thing. The second thing is that in that policy document, it's written that if there's any type of weapons of mass destruction used against Russia or one of its allies, then Russia would use a nuclear weapon. And secondly, as a third condition, if Russia identifies a conventional weakness in the face of an attack against itself, so that if it cannot deal with it by conventional means, then it retains its quote-unquote right to use a nuclear weapon. Now, when we look at the Ukrainian theater, I think it's difficult to kind of to see any of these conditions in the case of that ongoing war in Ukraine. Although the nuclear rhetoric is rather harsh, particularly before the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. I mean, every single time, either a Russian general or Putin himself or his spokesperson, Peskov, or sometimes Medvedev, they come up and say, look, I mean, we have nuclear weapons, okay? But that's kind of, I think, a declaratory policy rather than a manifestation of the will to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. That is a far-fetched possibility, but nevertheless, I mean, it should be kept in mind that, someday he might come up and say Russia is under an existential threat and tries to justify the use of a nuclear weapon. So that scenario, a nightmare scenario, should be somewhere in our minds. And let's hope that we will not arrive at such a stage in terms of the use of nuclear weapons. I think that there was one of the previous Russian foreign ministers who wrote an article, Kornikov. He said that that it is a kind of a very, very remote possibility, or a non-existent kind of possibility for Putin to make such a kind of radical decision to use a nuclear weapon. But I mean, people who are familiar with defense planning, including nuclear planning, like myself, you can never, do your plans on hopes, but on realities. I mean, so that there is this option, this nightmare option, and mentally, I think one should prepare himself or herself as to what to do if such a very, very remote possibility turns out to be a reality. I mean, that is the kind of the job of defense planners and nuclear planners. And I'm sure people are considering about different scenarios if a nuclear weapon is used by Putin in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Ambassador, just a short question, please. Would this war be a second Afghanistan defeat for Russia?
Well, I mean, there's a difference in geography, difference in culture, difference in society, and all the other things added together. But I do believe that this war, and I hope that it will end in a peaceful manner, the sooner the better, although this is a little bit naive expectation, but this will set in motion some chain reactions, I think also within Russia, and they will start soul searching. When is a $1 million question, of course. But it's true that this will certainly trigger discussions also within Russia as to why Putin made such a decision. I mean, it might prepare the end of Putin at a certain period of time, but would that be kind of lead to the dissolution of Russian Federation? This is not the issue. I mean, this is not the topic of concern.
Okay, thank you.
The idea here is what kind of impact it will have on Putin and his future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Tzogopoulos, I want to pose the same question concerning the nuclear issue, sir.
Thank you very much. Just one basic remark. I believe that the experience of the distinguished speakers here is more important than my opinion. I'm saying this because I know about the evolution of the Cold War through books. I have no personal experience of how it was due to my age. What I know through the books is that the mutual assured destruction was the reason why the Soviet Union and the United States reached kind of an understanding during the Cold War years, and we avoided a catastrophe for the planet. The big question I would also like to ask the distinguished speakers is, up to what extent, from your experience, this relevant understanding, which was existing during the Cold War years, exists in the 21st century, and especially since 2014. Up to what extent you believe that the Russian government and the United States can make relevant arrangements in order to prevent the nightmare scenario? Because, as the ambassador said before, theoretically, the Russian doctrine, the Russian nuclear doctrine, could allow Russia to use nuclear weapons according to some circumstances and conditions which are not very, very clear. So Russia can judge and act according to its own understanding of the situation and according to the interest of its president. So the big question, in my opinion, is up to what extent this can be prevented, taking into account the characteristics of the New World Order. Are the characteristics of the New World Order clear in a manner that can make us quite calm that this will not happen, or are conditions completely different, leading possibly Russia under extreme circumstances to do something that could have been inconceivable many years ago? So I prefer not to answer, but just to highlight the dilemma, because I believe that the only one who has the answer is the president of Russia, no one else.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Shahidov? Mr. Shahidov?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Nuclear issue.
Yes, this is a very actual problem for today, because Russia is likely to use nuclear weapons in this war, because Kremlin officials are already talking openly about this possibility, and it is written in Constitution of Russian Federation as well about the possibility to use the nuclear weapon. But it's very difficult to predict what Putin will do next. Putin's foreign policy is to destroy, And I think Ukraine will be the second Syria, and in this war, which no one will win, and Russia will lose, other interested countries will lose as well, and Ukraine will completely be destroyed, and humanity will lose, because the world will not be able to raise a nuclear war next time. The repetition of such scenario after the US nuclear bombing of Hiroshima will be a tragedy for all mankind, because today a number of countries have nuclear weapons, and in the event of a collapse, Russia will can distribute its nuclear weapons to all its republics. Just imagine that Chechnya, Dagestan, Tatarstan, and other autonomous republics will also have nuclear weapons after they will be independent. For these small states, which have no tradition, no experience of statehood, nuclear weapons are like a toy. So they can use this weapon at any time they want, and this means the end of all mankind, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Mrs. Ramona? Mrs. Ramona? Huh. Mrs. Ramona? Okay. So, yeah, we have little time left. I want to ask the last question, and please, short answer. What do you think about the effect of the Russia-Ukraine war on Turkey, Mr. General?
I think this shows
1 minute, just, yeah.
This shows that Russia has no respect for Turkey. They have violated, they've been dishonest, they violated international law over and over. They annexed Crimea, knowing how important the Tatar population is to Turkey. I understand why there's a unique historical relationship between Turkey and Russia. Turkey has to get along with its neighbor, but clearly Russia has shown it has zero respect for Turkey.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Ambassador, 1 minute, please. What do you think about the effects of this war on Turkey?
Well, the effects are already taking shape. I mean, we will certainly lose in tourism. I'm talking about tourism revenues.
Yeah.
And the gas prices in Turkey skyrocketed, which means harsher living conditions for our citizens. And there are shortages of food supply, particularly wheat and sunflower oil, seeds oil. So we started to pay the bill, a certain part of the bill, which might even get aggravated the more the war continues. So that it has already generated a serious impact on our economy and the living conditions of our society. And that is because of the aggressive attitude of Russia. I mean, from wherever you approach this issue, Russia started this war, this aggression. So that's all I would say.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Erickson?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I take the ambassador's comments, but I don't see a downside for Turkey. Turkey's trade with Russia is flourishing. Russian tourists are flooding into Antalya. At the same time, the Turkish armaments industry is selling Bayraktar TB2s to Ukraine. So to me, it's win-win for Turkey. And I don't say that casually. I say it seriously. It puts Erdogan. It brings Erdogan in from the cold. He now is in a position of being a diplomat and a peacemaker. And so economically, diplomatically, industrially, I think Turkey wins from this. Now, this is a cold thing to say, but this war, following the Azerbaijan-Armenia war, is a great advertisement for the Turkish defense industry. So I don't see many downsides for Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your comment. Mr. Tzogopoulos, the same question, please.
Thank you. If I could offer the Greek perspective in that regard, Greece's Prime Minister was recently in Istanbul, where he met with President Erdogan in the hope of both to look for a potential cooperation in strengthening the southeastern flank of the alliance, which are definitely good news. However, I'm not optimistic regarding a potential resolution of Greek-Turkish problems, which are diachronic and cannot be solved due to the war in Ukraine. So on the one hand, I'm optimistic. On the other, I remain to be pessimistic about any breakthroughs.
Thank you very much, sir, for your comment. Mr. Shahidov, the same question, please.
Yes, thank you. Of course, Turkey also is one of the countries that suffers most in this war. As a tourist destination, Turkey is losing millions of dollars today. And it's very difficult to imagine that citizens of the war-torn country, Ukraine and Russia, come to Turkey for vacation in the summer. It's impossible. So Turkey, one of the main players in the Black Sea, that's why it's one of the most sensitive countries in this war. I just want to underline that Turkey's role in these negotiations, because Turkey is the most successful country in this regard. Turkey is the only NATO member in this dialogue with both Ukraine and Russia. On the other hand, Ukraine and Russia support Turkey's mediation initiative. I think that Turkey must take again this initiative and continue March 29th dialogue between Ukraine and Russia.
Thank you very much, sir. Mrs. Ramona?
I strongly hope that it will...
I have a different question.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what do you have about this war? Do you have any comment in general? I mean, in general. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I hope to end it as soon as possible.
What, 1 minute, please, 1 or 2 minutes.
No, I don't have many comments. Just I want to come to an end this war. Of course, we are scared, and because having the borders with Ukraine, and it was a great panic among people in terms of buying medicine and protecting themselves and so on. We are afraid of nuclear weapons and so on. But on the other hand, we are very aware that this thing is not going to happen. And I think the whole population is with their eyes stuck on TV stations. All of them discuss this topic every night. So we are very updated, and we think that it will end, I don't know, some specialists say that it will end on May 7th. Let's hope they are right.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Dear participants, you have provided us with very important and useful information. It was a very efficient panel. On behalf of Istanbul Aydin University, I would like to thank you for your significant contribution. It has been a pleasure to have you here in our university. It has been an honor for me to be moderator of this event. My respects to all of you. Hope to see you on another panel. Good evening. Thank you very much again. Thank you. See you.
Good
Bye.
evening. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you very much. Thank you for your significant contribution.
Bye.
Bye. Goodbye.